Hey there, everybody. This is Billy Kangas from the Orant on Pathos, and I'm here with a very special guest, Brandon Vogt. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Billy, good to be here.
So, I invited you here because I'm very, very excited about your latest book. It's about something very close to my heart, social justice. And it I think it's a great book. It goes into some of the main areas of Catholic social teaching and gives real life examples of faithful men and women of God who dedicated their lives to serving and changing the world. And I think it's the book that we have been longing for in many ways. So, can you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I was inspired to write this book really as a result of my conversion to Catholicism back in 2008, so about 6 years ago. Before I was Catholic, I was evangelical, and as you know, as many evangelicals are very passionate about social justice and changing the world, especially young evangelicals. But when I became Catholic, I realized that when I tried to share this passion and mention phrases like social justice or institutional injustice, alarm bells went off. And I realized that these were dirty words for many people, and I was very confused as to why that was. Over the years, I learned more about Catholic social teaching. In fact, Catholic social teaching was one of the main lures that drew me into the church. As I was in the RCIA process, we were introduced to some of the documents by Pope Leo the 13th and Pope John Paul II, and so I was very attracted to this rich body of wisdom. But I came to discover after I became Catholic that this is, to use Christopher West's description of the theology of the body, very similarly, a ticking time bomb that needs to go off. These teachings are amazingly rich and profound and mostly ignored or undiscovered. So I wanted to reintroduce them to the Catholic mind, but also to sort of redeem many of these phrases that had been distorted or hijacked or misunderstood. So I decided to write the book and try to offer an authentic presentation of social teaching from the church, and I thought the best way to do that was to use the lives of the saints. And so I picked out 14 saints who really embody these themes of Catholic social teaching, and the book was the result.
Beautiful. I like I said, I think it's huge. I'm also a convert to the church, and I would say that the Catholic social teaching was a huge lure for me as well. So I certainly can relate to that. I think that a lot of times these teachings lay undiscovered, not because people are against them, but they simply don't know that they're there. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with Catholics who, when they realize the depth and the beauty and the riches that are already within their tradition, how excited they get because
Yeah.
there's this way to articulate our just relationship to the world that has been developed and enriched for thousands of years, and the Catholic Church has it. I mean, it's incredible. It's really inspired my own work. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about the different categories that you laid out in your book and hear what you had to say about how people can understand these things. Does that sound good?
Yeah, great.
So the first one that you list is called Life and Dignity of the Human Person. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying that the book is framed with these seven themes of Catholic social teaching that you mentioned, Billy, and they're taken from the bishops of or the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, who about 10, 20 years ago surveyed all of Catholic social teaching. You know, they studied all of the magisterial documents, the biblical teachings, the writings from the saints, and they neatly categorized it into these seven major themes. And so I use that same framework in the book. And the first theme, as you mentioned, is the life and dignity of the human person. Now, I should mention that these themes were not arbitrarily laid out. It's for good reason that the very first theme is life and dignity of the human person, because all the other themes are grounded on this idea that man and woman were created in the image of God, and because of that, they've been marked with an inviolable dignity that can never be avoided and can never be threatened for any reason, whether because of ethnicity or poverty, whether because you're unable to contribute to society, or you're in the womb, or you're near death. Whatever the reason, everybody has dignity that must be honored and never violated. And so for this chapter, I chose two saints who I think really embodied this great theme of dignity of the human person, and they were Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa, and St. Peter Claver. And so both of them, in their own ways and in their own times, sort of made it their mission to uplift the dignity of those in whom it had been rejected and discarded. So again, this is the first and most foundational theme of Catholic social teaching. If we reject the dignity of the human person, really everything else just topples over. If humans are really nothing more than just animals without any innate dignity, then there's no reason to assume they have rights and responsibilities, or that we should care for those on the margins of society. So it's so crucial that we uphold this fundamental theme of the life and dignity of the human person.
Now, I think that that's really key. By recognizing the image of God, the sacredness of the person around you, you're able to relate to them in a way that is sanctified and in many sense sacred. And I think that leads to the second area that you put in your book, the call to family, community, and participation. What does that mean for us Catholics?
Yeah, this is a very interesting theme, and you're right that it kind of flows from the first theme. So the first theme of life and dignity of the human person is a recognition that we're all marked with the image and likeness of God. But the second theme recognizes that this God is a Trinitarian God. You know, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit live in innate community. And so we too are called not to be isolated individuals, but to be united in a community, both small in a family and large in a society. And so this theme, in its essence, echoes that great adage that no man is an island. You know, we're created not just for our own selfish pleasures and pursuits, but to work together to bring about a flourishing society. Now, the first call in that phrase, call to family, community, and participation, is especially noteworthy, the call to family. Many other social systems, be it, say, capitalism, which is grounded on the individual, or socialism, which is grounded on the society, the state, don't have this strong and pointed focus as Catholic social teaching does on the family. Catholic social teaching sees the family as the basic building block of society, and therefore we should privilege the family in all of our economic and social decisions. We should do everything we can to promote and keep families intact. And so I chose, again, two saints for this theme, St. Francis of Rome and Blessed Anne-Marie Javouet, both of whom emphasized the need to unite with others in community to build about great good. Both of them were very successful activists in their own day. One of them actually was a laywoman who had a husband and took care of him, and so exhibited what it means to live a saintly life in the midst of family. And the other one built up a community of sisters dedicated to education, and was very successful all throughout France. And so I think, again, we need to remember, if nothing else, that Catholic social teaching is grounded not on the individual, not on the isolated person, and not on the grand society or state, but on the family. That's the basic building block of society.
I think that's fantastic. One of the things that's always a challenge when we're dealing with areas of community where people are interacting with one another is that, in spite of our communities being, in a sense, an icon of God's Trinitarian life, we don't have this perfect perichoresis, this divine love that governs everything that we do. And oftentimes we have to deal with the very real brokenness of the world. And I think that actually connects in a lot of ways to the third category that you talk about in the book, rights and responsibilities. Can you talk a little bit about what this part of our Catholic life looks like?
Sure. Now, this theme, like the other, like the previous theme, again flows from the life and dignity of the human person. If everybody is marked by the inviolable image of God, then we all bear certain rights that likewise can't be violated. So these include things like the right to life, the right to religious liberty, the right to food and drink and health care and dignified work. All of these things are innate to us simply because we're humans made in the image of God. It's not because of what we've done. We didn't earn any of these rights. There's nothing we can do to keep them or to boost them up. We have them simply because, again, we were created by God. But there's a second part of this theme which many people miss or discard or conveniently ignore, and that's responsibilities. The bishops say that with every right comes a corresponding responsibility. It sounds a lot like Peter Parker's uncle. With great power comes great responsibility, and that's Catholic social teaching. That even though we each have rights to these things, we also are responsible for upholding the rights of others. It's not a power grab for my rights and give me what I deserve, but it's also how can I uplift and serve the rights of those whose rights have been trampled upon. So for this theme, I chose two saints again, Saint Roque Gonzalez and Saint Thomas More. Saint Roque Gonzalez uplifted the rights of Indians in Central America at a time when most of them were being taken advantage of pretty egregiously. And when they had no other advocate, he stood up for them and gave them a voice and helped them to find community and housing and dignified work and a lot of these basic rights. St. Thomas More, of course, very famously upheld the rights of the poor people whom he represented as a lawyer, and also the right to conscience, to obey one's conscience wherever it led. But he also understood the responsibility aspect, which is why I kind of chose him for this chapter. Again, he didn't selfishly claim rights for himself, but he knew that he had a responsibility to the rights of others and ultimately a responsibility to follow the rights of his own conscience. So I think both of these saints, again, give us the full picture of both sides, the rights and the responsibilities.
That's a key balance to strike. And I think one of the challenges that I'm always facing is not only defending the rights of those close to me, but the rights of those who, like you mentioned, are particularly vulnerable, who are maybe marginalized by society, who are easy to take advantage of because they don't necessarily have the voice or the political or social power to stand up for themselves. And I think that really relates to the next thing that you talked about, which is the option for the poor and the vulnerable. What is that, and how does that look in our lives?
Yeah, good question, Billy. And this is probably the most confusing theme of them all because people see option for the poor and vulnerable. Oh, it's optional. I don't have to do that. It's a choice, But that word is probably that's not the best translation of the word. It's a phrase that originated in Latin America, and the word option maybe could be better translated as preference for the poor and vulnerable. And what this theme essentially means is that in every decision we make, again, whether economically, socially, personally, we should always ask, how does this decision affect the poor and vulnerable? Does it uplift them? Does it denigrate them? What effect does it have? So they should be our ultimate preference above all else. And we see this, of course, through the life of Christ. Our Lord preferenced the poor, the marginalized, the vulnerable among everybody else. And so that's what Catholic social teaching calls us to as well. So I chose two saints for this one, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati and St. Vincent de Paul. Blessed Pier Giorgio was a young guy. He was born in 1901 and died at age 24. But in that short life, he lived a remarkable witness to particularly this theme of the option for the poor and vulnerable. By the time he died, he was personally serving close to 100 different poor families and individuals on the streets of Turin, regularly visiting them, giving them food and money and help. He listened to them and provided them spiritual support. And so I think he provides a great example, especially to young people like you and I, of what it looks like to institute a world-changing effort. I mean, he really changed his community through these small, simple acts of preferencing the poor. St. Vincent de Paul, we probably know because of the St. Vincent de Paul Society, which was named after him. But he, again, has a crazy story of serving the poor. Before I wrote this book, I knew the details of his life and how he was especially compassionate to poor people on rural farms, and even though he was chaplain to the queen of his native land, he eschewed that to go and become a chaplain to small farming communities, taking a very tangible action to preference the poor. But what I didn't know was some of the more exciting details of his life. For instance, he was hijacked by a group of pirates, and for about 3 or 4 years was forced under manual labor under these, they were Muslim pirates, and eventually he converted his Muslim kidnapper, and the two of them sailed across an entire sea, hundreds of miles, in this dinky little boat. It took them several months, and they eventually made it. So much like St. Paul, he's got all these remarkable, shocking stories of dangerous sea voyages and whatnot mixed in with his concern for the poor. But all that to say, both of these guys, Blessed Pier Giorgio and St. Vincent de Paul, also exhibit a good balance between serving the poor personally, but also advocating for institutional change. You know, I know you work for Bread for the World here for not much longer, and I've been involved with them for a while too, and that's a great example of an organization that understands this balance, that it's good to personally provide food and drink and healthcare and work. We need that. Don't mean to discount it at all. But we need to supplement that with institutional justice for caring for the poor and vulnerable at the level of law and politics and institutional justice. So both of these saints understood that and provide a good model for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The analogy I often like to use about the importance of institutions is kind of a riff on the parable of the Good Samaritan. We look back at who, Jesus talks about the Samaritan who finds this man beaten on the side of the road. And he picks him up, he mends his wounds, he puts him on his donkey, he takes him to an inn, and he pays for the whole expense. But then I imagine, like, what would happen if the next day there's another man beaten up by robbers on the side of the road, and he also pays for the expense of that, and the next day another one, and the next day another one. At some point, one begins to think, is there a system in place that we could set up that would prevent this kind of thing? Like, maybe we should hire a police officer to go down the road and make sure there's no bandits. And that's the kind of wisdom that Catholic Church brings to a lot of its thinking. And one of the areas that is most vocal in sort of protecting systemically is the system of the worker. And this is one of these areas that you also highlight in your book, the dignity and rights of the worker. This is, I think, a bit of a hot issue today because there's a lot of mixed opinions on unionization and things like that. So what does the Catholic Church teach about the dignity and rights of the worker, and how is that played out in the lives of the saints that you have in the book?
Great question. So this theme is very subtly worded. It's the dignity of work and the rights of workers. And so the church has kind of mixed two things into this theme. So first, the dignity of work. It's interesting to note that in the book of Genesis, man, Adam, was called to till the garden, to work, even before the fall, even before original sin. And so work was created as a good thing. We were created, in a sense, to work. Now, after the fall, of course, work became more toilsome and burdensome. But work in itself is a good thing. I think many of us experience this if we, sit around lazily for 2 or 3 weeks with nothing to do other than watch TV or whatever. We want to do something. We want to work. You know, it may not mean work in an office full of cubicles, but we need to work. We feel like we want to contribute and produce and create, just like God does. And so there's a certain value to work that Catholic social teaching advocates. Also, though, there's the rights of workers. So this goes in conjunction with that dignity of work. Work is valuable, indeed, but we also need to put some constraints on it. You know, not all work is healthy and worth promotion. And so people should be given work that's productive. In other words, it's an assault on somebody's dignity if you just assign them meaningless labor that has no purpose or end, but just sort of busy work. This is why many slave camps, like I'm thinking of especially the gulags in Russia, they just sentence men to years of mindless work, which just involves moving one stone from one place to another, and after all the stones are moved, picking them up and moving them back. That's indignified work, and again, I think we all can intuit why that's so problematic. But also, we should have work that is safe, that provides an ability to do our work and go home at night. And then finally, we should provide work that gives a living wage. Now, this is controversial because the church never specifies what that living wage is. That would be a whole lot easier if she did. But the reason she doesn't, in her wisdom, is because that varies context to context, depending at what time period you're talking about, depending where you live, depending on what job you're working, depending on how big a family you have that you need to support. The living wage can vary by all of these factors. But whatever that number is, the church says that man should be able to work and earn enough money to provide the basic needs for him and his family, or a woman and her family. So that's kind of the sketch of what the church means by the rights of workers. Now, as you mentioned, this is played out practically by things like the church's promotion of unions. Again, another controversial subject, and the church doesn't offer an unqualified advocacy for unions. There's certain limits, but she also says that workers have the right to band together and to appeal for, say, a living wage, or for if they're fighting against an unjust number of hours or difficult tasks that they're working. So the church has always said that that's something worth protecting and supporting. Now, the two saints that I highlight in this chapter, one is Saint Benedict of Nursia, the famous founder of Western monasticism, and his great rule, which is his collection of precepts and guidelines for monastic life. He really emphasizes this dignity of work. The great Benedictine motto is ora et labora, prayer and work. Not prayer is work, not ora est labora, but prayer, ora et labora, prayer and work. And so work itself is, in a way, a spiritual practice, a pathway to God, because it has dignity. The second saint I chose was Servant of God Dorothy Day. So again, another controversial figure, but one who I'm a huge fan of for many reasons. But for this particular chapter, I talk about how she, throughout her life, stood up for the rights of workers. She would regularly protest and picket whenever the rights of workers were being violated. In one particular case, which I go in depth into in the book, she stood up with the cemetery workers of New York, who were being asked to work long weeks, 50, 60-hour weeks, and they really weren't earning a living wage. So she stood alongside them in difficult circumstances for their right to work decent hours for a living wage. So both of these saints provide color and clarity for this great theme of the dignity of work and the rights of workers.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned that the way that Dorothy Day helped in certain circumstances was by standing up with. And I think that is related to the sixth theme, which is a weird word called solidarity. What in the world is that? It's not something we normally use in our language. What does solidarity mean?
Yeah, I think you nailed it a few seconds ago when you said to stand with. That's solidarity in a nutshell. Solidarity means entering into community, especially with those who are suffering or downtrodden. Now, our church offers many examples. I've already talked about here several saints who entered solidarity with the poor, the marginalized, the sick, the suffering. And for this chapter, I chose two saints, though, who I think maybe above all exhibited this great theme. One was St. John Paul II, and the other is St. Damien of Molokai. So John Paul II has been deemed by many as the Pope of Solidarity, because throughout his life and eventually his pontificate, he stood with many different groups, even many of them that you wouldn't expect. For instance, as a young boy, he grew up in a community that was mixed between Catholics and Jews, and they were very divided. They didn't like each other. But John Paul walked right into that divide and felt comfortable on both sides of it. In fact, as a boy, they'd play these soccer games. One team would be all Catholics, one team would be all Jews. And the Jewish team one time lacked a goalie, and John Paul just walked over to the other side and put on the goalie shirt and decided to play for their team, which seems like an innocent gesture, but really spoke volumes to his friends and to the other Jews there. Throughout his life, again, when the Great Wars broke out and the Jews were being persecuted, he stood alongside them, he protected them, he helped them, he advocated for them. And then in his pontificate, again, he spoke up and stood with many different social groups, many different religious groups. He was always there in solidarity with them. But perhaps most famously, after he became Pope around 1979, I believe, he helped stimulate this movement in his homeland of Poland, known as Solidarity. It was a movement started by a bunch of shipbuilders and blue-collar workers, led by an electrician named Lech Wałęsa, and they stood up to the socialist regime that had taken over Poland and had really put the clamps down on workers' rights and on religion. But they stood up peacefully, non-violently, but they went on strike, and they were having marginal success until John Paul II flew home as Pope, and he stood up on this great platform in front of a million people in Warsaw and proclaimed to them, "Do not be afraid, do not be afraid." And those words inspired new hope and energy among the people, and eventually launched this solidarity movement that led to, many people agree, the downfall of communism itself. It was very influential during that period. So he, from the beginning of his life to the end, I think exhibits solidarity. St. Damien of Molokai was a missionary to Hawaii, specifically to a colony on the island of Molokai that was full of lepers. Now this was, I believe, early 20th century, maybe late 19th century, and the lepers were kind of discarded by society. It was, of course, a deadly disease with no cure, highly contagious, and so they isolated anybody who had leprosy onto this colony and really didn't provide for them. Barely gave them some food. Every now and then dipped down with a helicopter to provide, some supplies or some water or whatnot. Helicopter ship. St. Damien, though, decided that he wanted to go and be with the people and serve them as a chaplain, to bring them the sacraments, to uplift their dignity. He was no fool. He knew that by doing this, he would most likely contract leprosy himself, and that's precisely what happened. From the moment he landed on the island, he began speaking to the lepers in the second person plural. So he would say, "We lepers," not "you lepers, we lepers." And so that language communicates the solidarity with which he shared with them. He eventually contracted leprosy and died, but he's still remembered as a man who not just served the lepers, but became one himself. He literally stood with them, with his body and with his suffering. So John Paul II and Damien, I think, are two great saints of solidarity.
That's fantastic. I think that's another message that I'm continually hearing, especially with a lot of the things that current Pope Francis is saying. And it's a key thing, because I think, if we could maybe throw the best example of solidarity in, it would be our Lord himself, who dwelt in solidarity with us as human beings in a fallen world. And I think that if we can't connect with this part, we lose out on the entire incarnational element of who Christ is. So I get excited about solidarity. I get excited about the rest of these, so that's one of my favorites. Now, one of the things you had mentioned earlier was God's call for us to be workers, to take care of the soil, to work in the earth. And that is actually really connected to the seventh category, the care for creation, which you mentioned in the book. And this is, in many ways, one of those issues that is the ticking time bomb of ticking time bombs on this list. This is a hot issue. For many of us, we think that this is something that we really need to get serious about because we're living in a world that is increasingly showing that we have a way of impacting it, both positively and negatively. So, how does the church help to couch the discussion about ecology and care for creation within a faithful Catholic framework?
That's a loaded question. I don't know if we'll have time to fully dive into it, so I'll just offer a cursory sketch here. So, in this final theme of Catholic social teaching, which is care for God's creation, which is, by the way, probably sort of the newest theme among the bunch. Only in recent years, maybe within the last century, has the church become particularly sensitive to this issue. But nevertheless, it stems all the way back to the beginning of time. You know, we read in the opening chapters of Genesis that man was created in part to subdue and to steward the world, which includes, of course, the environment, but also the animals within it, the plants within it. And the church understands that this is important for a couple reasons. First of all, because the world proclaims the glory of God. You know, this is God's creation, God's gift to us. And so just as we wouldn't abuse or exploit a gift that a dear friend or a dear loved one gave us, so we shouldn't exploit the gift of God. So that reason is number one. Number two, though, the church keenly understands that environmental degradation typically disproportionately affects the poor and the marginalized. And so when we look at places like Africa or Southeast Asia, we see that environmental disaster, whatever form it takes, whether it be deforestation or exploiting the land so that nothing grows, these practices hurt especially rural and poor farmers most of all. And so while many more well-off people benefit from the practices, they hurt others. And so that's why, alluding to the earlier theme, the option for the poor and vulnerable, anytime we launch out into an environmental endeavor, we should ask that question. What is this going to do to the poor and vulnerable? What effect is it going to have? That's one of the very first questions we should ask. Now, for this chapter, it was tough to find some saints who embodied these themes, again, because it's kind of a recent emphasis. I considered Pope Benedict XVI, who, of course, is not yet a saint. He's still alive. But he, more than any Catholic figure in history, wrote a lot on the environment, on the need for caring for and stewarding creation. In fact, many people have dubbed him either the Green Pope or the Pope of Ecology, again, because he was very sensitive to this issue. But instead of him, I quoted small passages from Pope Benedict a lot throughout these two chapters. But the two saints I focused on were Saint Giles and Saint Isidore the Farmer, not to be confused with Saint Isidore of Seville, but Saint Isidore the Farmer. So Saint Giles was a very popular saint throughout the northern part of Europe for a long time in the Middle Ages, but he's kind of been forgotten since. And he was a wealthy man. His parents owned multiple castles, had huge amounts of land and money, and when they died, they gave it all to him. But much like St. Francis of Assisi, he immediately gave it all away. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And he, much to his friends' chagrin, went off to live in the land. He set up sort of this little forest hermitage where he prayed for a lot of the day, and he ate whatever he could find that grew in the land. He befriended animals and would heal them when they became injured. So he offers this very interesting look at what it looks like to be one with the land. Now, most of us are probably not going to follow his lead wholeheartedly. He was a vegetarian. He, again, gave away everything to live in the woods. We're probably not going to do that. But what his witness shows us is this this sort of revolutionary message that the land and property and creation doesn't exist for our own exploitation. In his time, many people associated land with wealth. You have land, you have money, you have worth, and land is merely a means to a financial end. But he didn't see it that way. He saw land and animals and the creation as goods in themselves, goods which need to be respected and stewarded. So for that reason, I think he's a great example. And then I chose St. Isidore the Farmer, who was, as his title suggests, a farmer, a man of the land, who had a close relationship both to crops and food and especially water. He had a couple of very interesting miracles attributed to him involving water. Legendary, maybe, but nevertheless, the message that they communicate, I think, ties well into the church's call to care for and honor creation. So both of those saints, among others, highlight this theme.
Beautiful. I love those sorts of stories. So yeah, I think it's amazing. And you mentioned that in the process of creating this list of 14 great examples, that there was some struggle. How did you kind of figure out who you wanted to put where? Did you want to put some in like every category, or was there like
Yeah.
one guy on the sidelines that you wish you had room for?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Billy. It took a long time, surprisingly, to get this structure in place before I started writing because of that struggle. I'll tell you, my greatest problem was the one you mentioned, that most of these saints could have equally fit in most of these categories. I mean, that's what a saint is, someone who very well, maybe perfectly embodies the church's life and teachings and is a full friend of Jesus Christ, which means that they embody all of what Christ taught. And so people like John Paul II or Teresa of Calcutta, I mean, just about any category here, option for the poor and vulnerable, rights and responsibilities, solidarity, they could have easily fit. And so it was a kind of a strategic struggle to put them in places where they fit, but also to free up open spots for others who I thought should fit in the book. There's a couple saints that people were surprised that didn't make the cut, especially for the care for creation. I talk about this a little in the book, that when most Catholics think of care for creation, two saints leap to mind: Saint Francis of Assisi and Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha. And I chose not to put them in there for a couple reasons, which I go into detail in the book, but mostly because I think these labels have been unfortunately laid upon these figures, and I'm not sure they fit all too well. St. Francis, of course, befriended the animals and sung great canticles to the sun and to the moon, but he wasn't sort of the tree-hugging environmentalist that we put in front of our gardens and many of us peg him as. And so I kind of wanted to get away from that reputation. And then with St. Kateri, she didn't really have a special care for creation that would set her apart from many. It's just she was a Native American, and so for that reason alone, many people thought, well, hey, you have an Indian, so she's probably a good patron for the environment. But again, I wanted to get away from that unfortunate assumption. So I introduced these two maybe unfamiliar saints, St. Giles and St. Isidore the farmer, to fill in the gap. But one thing I did throughout the book that I think will help people is within these chapters, I don't only focus on the 14 main saints, but I have several sidebars in each chapter that highlight small stories and anecdotes from the life of other saints. And so in total, you'll discover maybe a few dozen different saints. And so you get a little sampling from many, even if they aren't the main featured saints in the book.
I think that's fantastic. And one of the things that I was constantly challenged by with this book was not just discovering new saints or having a deepening appreciation for old familiar saints, but wanting to be a saint myself. Wanting to be a person that's contributing to this great history of justice, of solidarity, of fighting for families and workers and living a life that reflects the gospel. And so I guess my question for you is, how do you think people should start to take steps so that we all can be saints who are in line with Catholic social teaching and are active in doing the good work of serving the world?
Well, a saint, in its most basic definition, is simply a friend of Jesus Christ. Now that flows out with many implications and ramifications, but at its core, a saint is a friend of Jesus Christ. You could say that about all 14 of these saints, certainly, as well as all the other ones in the book. And so I'd say that's the most fundamental step. Find and know Jesus Christ and fall in love with him. And when you do, you'll follow not only his commandments, but the commandments of the church that he gave, because you'll sense that this way of life that Jesus proposes and the way of life that his church elaborates on is the key not only to personal flourishing, but also to building a just and healthy society. And so the closer you move to Jesus and his church, the closer that you go to this authentic pathway to a just society. I'll also add, though, that I mentioned this in my chapter on Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa, that she always told people when they asked her, Mother, how can I do what you do? Or, Mother, I want to be a part of this. I want to, do amazing things like you are. She would always say, go back home and find your own Calcutta, and then do one thing at a time, just one. That was one of her favorite words, one. Just one. She said, I helped one person off the street, and that led me to help 42,000 people off the street. But if I didn't help that one, I probably wouldn't have helped anybody else. And so who's that one? Who's that one person that you can meet today and make a difference? One of the saints that Mother Teresa loved was Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower. And her great program for spiritual advancement, The Little Way, was based on this idea. What is the immediate demand of love in front of me? Not how can I change the world, not what do I need to do 5, 10, 15 years down. No. Today, what's the immediate demand of love? That might be the poor man that's standing right in front of me on the street corner. That might be the annoying coworker in the office. That might be the difficult family member, whatever it is. What's the immediate demand of love right now? Take that step, meet that demand, and then, like Mother Teresa, those small steps will eventually steamroll into great things. And so that's the two pieces of advice I would give. Fall in love with Jesus Christ, who's the key in the path to building a just society, and then just take small steps with great love.
That's exactly right. That's one of the things I think about every time I get overwhelmed. You read the news, you read all the things, you feel like you can't have enough of an impact on the world because it just is overwhelming. But Teresa of Calcutta would always say, there are no great things, only small things with great love.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways that's something I should probably get tattooed on my eyelids.
But a small tattoo with great love.
Yeah, I don't know if I could read it very well, but I think that's the heart and soul of all of this work. To be people who are loving God and loving others, who are every day active in every decision, to be aware of where the Holy Spirit is leading, and to worship God in all things. Work in prayer, right? So I really appreciate the book. I think it's something that everybody should buy. Where can people find it?
Well, you can get it at your local Catholic bookstore. Always good to support them. You can also find it on Amazon or through our Sunday Visitors website, or you can learn more about the book and buy it by just going to saintsandsocialjustice.com.
Now that's the website dedicated to this book, but you are like a web phenomenon in a certain sense. You're all over the place. What are some things that you're working on right now where people can connect with you?
Sure. My own website and blog is brandonvogt.com, VOGT, just my name, brandonvogt.com, and I do a lot of stuff there. I have a blog that I regularly update. I do weekly giveaways, and in fact, just a couple days ago, I released a brand new ebook that I just wrote called The Saints' Favorite Books, and I'm giving it away completely free. So go to brandonvogt.com and you can download your copy of that. And then I also launched about a year ago a website called strangenotions.com, which is created to be the central place of dialogue between Catholics and atheists. So 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we have new articles, videos, interviews, stuff like that, on the big questions of life. Who am I? Why do I exist? Where did the universe come from? Does God exist? If so, what is he like? So we tackle these big questions, not just through the content, the articles and the videos and the interviews, but also through very rich comment box discussion. All of our articles have hundreds of comments, and it's really great conversation. So if you're maybe questioning or doubting, or if you have a friend or family member who's wondering whether there's good reasons to believe in God, send them to that website, strangenotions.com. And then finally, my day job, who I work with Father Robert Barron at Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. And every day we're producing awesome stuff at our website, wordonfire.org. You'll find all of Father Barron's weekly homilies, articles, YouTube commentaries. We have a daily blog. And also, in about 3 weeks here, we're going to be releasing a totally revamped version of the website. It's going to be amazing. I wish I could share all the special features, but I have to save that. But stay tuned to wordonfire.org.
Well, wonderful. I really appreciate all that you do to make the richness of the Catholic Church something that's available to everyone, at least everyone who has access to a computer, or even a
Or a
bookstore.
book. Or a book.
No, bookstore. The literate and the technologically, now we just need to, translate all your words and send them out and
Yeah.
broadcast them.
Right.
No, you're doing great things. You're, I think, a real example of what the new evangelization can look like. And I do appreciate you coming on this video and talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. And I encourage all the viewers, check out Brandon online and in your local bookstore. Thanks.